President, honourable members, good morning. Plastic pellet spills give rise, like the recent event on the Spanish coast or the French coast last year, give rise to a wave of public concern. And such accidents are occasional, but they create sudden and significant negative impacts on some regions. Other regions have been struggling with the endemic pollution by plastic pellets due to poor handling at every stage of the supply chain, and such pollution may not be always as visible as in major accidents, but has nonetheless harmful impacts on soils and waters, on lives and livelihoods. So the need for action is clear, and that's why in October last year the Commission put forward a proposal for a regulation on preventing plastic pellet losses. The primary focus is on prevention because once pellets enter the environment, they are difficult and costly to capture. And I would like to thank the Parliament for giving priority to the work of this proposal in such a busy period of time. Coming back to the case at hand, let me begin with the tools that we already have at the EU level to assist. EU system hosted in the European Maritime Safety Agency allows the sharing of information between countries on containers lost at sea. It was duly activated in this case. Other forms of EU support are available through the Emergency Response Coordination Centre, EU Civil Protection Mechanism, for example, and the EU Solidarity Fund. Support might be also available from funds such as the European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund and Cohesion Funds. So the reasons for the fall remain to be investigated, as well as the responsibilities. In the meantime, cleanup is ongoing, but these operations are costly in terms of time and equipment, and they are also very challenging, especially at the sea. And that's why accidental and operational losses should be best avoided in the first place. And when losses occur, the polluter pays principle must apply. So the Commission proposal on plastic pellet losses requires economic operators to act in the following order. Firstly, they have to take action to prevent any spills. Then comes the containment obligation to ensure that spilled pellets do not leak to the environment. And thirdly, if pellets pollute the environment, cleanup must be ensured. So the proposal covers operators that produce, store or convert plastic pellets into products, and EU and non-EU carriers transporting pellets by road, rail and inland waterways in the Union. Given the international nature of maritime transport, this sector was not included in the proposal. So the Commission is, however, actively working at the International Maritime Organization to tackle highly complex matter. The IMO is examining the issue of plastic pellets transportation in containers intensively, notably on three aspects. So firstly, good quality packaging to withstand the shocks and handling normally encountered during transport. Second, transport information to clearly identify those freight containers containing plastic pellets. And thirdly, safe stowage to minimize the hazards to the marine environment. Specifically, freight containers with plastic pellets should be stowed under deck whenever possible, or inboard in sheltered areas of exposed decks. So we are determined, with the support of the Member States, to speed up this work with the International Maritime Organization and help take decisions. This would avoid ending up with a patchwork of different regional and national rules, and in particular given that many containers are loaded onto ships in ports outside the EU. So it's important that these rules are agreed and adopted worldwide to be effective. At the same time, we are ready to consider the inclusion of further provisions in EU law on the basis of the developments at the International Maritime Organization. So this could include a ban on the carriage of pellets in bulk, and also tighter rules on the quality of packaging and the transport of pellets in the main body of ships. In this way, we would already reduce the risk of pellets washing up on our beaches. Protecting coastal and marine ecosystems is in the interest of all. EU's blue economy sectors, including fisheries, aquaculture and coastal tourism, are directly affected by the plastic pellets pollution. So we need firm action by all parties involved, as sea waters are transboundary, and this will require close cooperation among Member States. Despite our efforts, the sea remains unpredictable and at times a dangerous place to operate. So adverse weather conditions may unavoidably lead to catastrophic events, it is then that remediation solutions are necessary. So the Commission will pursue the evaluation of Marine Strategy Framework Directive, which already contains provisions to protect the marine environment against harm caused by litter, the Environmental Liability Directive, which offers limited protection in this regard, will also be subject to evaluation. The Commission will continue to contribute to the research guidance, promotion and support of best handling practice with a view to reducing any possible effects caused by plastic pellets losses. Reducing microplastic pollution is also an objective of the EU mission Restore Our Ocean and Waters, which is developing and demonstrating innovative solutions to prevent, eliminate and monitor microplastics in our ocean and waters. Finally, I would like to point at the new international instrument on plastic pollution that is currently being negotiated. Let me stress the importance of including legally binding provisions to prevent release of plastics into the environment through the life cycle. I am confident that together we will find the best way to deal with the current crisis and pave the way to preventing such crises in the future. This entails the rapid adoption of the proposal on plastic pellets, and I am sure that we are all united in our determination to do all we can to avert such ecological disasters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let us take the speakers speaking on behalf of the political groups. Mrs. Kloon on behalf of the EPP.
Thank you, President and Commissioner. And as we speak today, hundreds of workers and volunteers are working day and night to clean up those millions of plastic pellets that have washed up on their shores in Galicia. They're doing so because they want to protect their environment, their fishing, their shellfish industry and their livelihoods in the tourism sector. And they're asking questions. How did this happen? Could it have been prevented? Could the extent of the damage that we're seeing today have been reduced? And why was there such a delay before they saw action and support from their government? What happened from the 8th of December last to the 3rd of January? Why did it take so long for their regional government to be informed so that they could take action? And they want to know what's to be done at European level to prevent, to minimise and better coordinate a response to such a serious event in the future. It has to be noted that the company responsible for the transport of these pellets did act and inform as soon as they could. They will investigate how it happened and they will contribute to the clean-up. And I'm glad to see the Spanish public prosecutor has started an investigation. We must provide answers, but also we must give direction as to how such a scenario can be avoided or reduced in the future. This spillage has brought into focus the regulation on preventing microplastic pollution. Currently, that's being considered here in this Parliament, a regulation that aims to see measures applied across the plastic industry chain to reduce pellet loss by up to 70%. And I want to see the adoption of this report, a practical regulation that will be effective. We must act to prevent such spillages. We must commit to containing spillages, to reducing their impact on the environment, and we must have a coordinated clean-up response to help and support those vulnerable communities who suffer and bear the brunt of these environmental spills.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Socialists and Democrats, Mr. González Casares.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Commissioner. We're faced with a double tide in Galicia now, a tide of plastic and a tide of incompetence and lies from the regional government of the PP. Its pathetic mismanagement has left citizens to their own devices to do the clear-up. For weeks now, we've seen pollution caused by microplastics, a key priority for the Commission and the Socialists. We're taking this initiative forward. Pellets are not beautiful, which the government of my regional government is saying. They're a danger to the environment, and potentially a danger to human health. So, as the Commission and the government of Spain have said, we need to combat this. Plastic pollution needs to be tackled. We're seeing it now in Galicia. We need strengthened EU legislation rather than trying to brush things under the carpet, which is what the PP is trying to do. And also I would say to the PP, sometimes you're on the side of pollution, saying, nothing to see here, we don't need more ambitious European legislation, but then the tide turns and you recognise that the problems which have occurred due to pollution in Abastedo and Galicia itself. We're seeing the consequences of this. I see Montserrat laughing there, but it's been terrible mismanagement in Galicia.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Renew Europe, Mrs. Chabot.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner. Ladies and gentlemen, in this hemicycle, all the plastic objects were pellets before, because that's how you start making plastic. For years, our coasts have been affected by oil spills, but now we have these white tides. But of course, this is also very harmful because the pellets get mixed up with sand, and they also come from oil. I'm thinking of our Spanish colleagues, I'm thinking of what's happening, and I think it is absolutely necessary to have effective prevention measures. Now, there are solutions on the table. They've been there for a long time, but they're not implemented, and they're not so difficult to implement. We have leaks and spills throughout the whole process when these plastic pellets are manufactured. But how can we have them actually falling into the sea? We have to push the IMO to look at container traceability, and when working on plastic pellets, I would also push you to work on the plastic pellet traceability, so traceability of the pellets themselves in order to establish responsibility. Thank you. Thank you very much. On behalf of the Greens, Mrs. Ska-Keller.
Dear colleagues, unfortunately, the catastrophe that we see in Galicia happening is just the tip of an enormous iceberg. The pollution of our sea with over 1 billion plastic pellets is a huge disaster for the environment, for marine animals and for the local communities. But this disaster is not even 1% of the plastic pellets lost every single year. We need to stop this ongoing catastrophe. No one is gaining anything from unused plastic pellets, flakes or powders getting lost. It's high time to give clear requirements to producers, handlers and carriers of plastic raw materials to make sure that plastic pellet losses are prevented. And if they happen, reported, and there is a liability for those carriers and handlers. The Commission has put forward a proposal that I very much welcome, and I'm sure the Parliament will make sure that this legislation will become even stronger and more waterproof. Let us not wait until more disasters are happening in Galicia or elsewhere. Let's put an end to this wasteful handling of our very limited resources. Let's just not leave a plastic trace on our planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the ECR, Mr. Bouchardet Villalba.
Thank you, President. The beaches of Galicia have been inundated with pellets, and you only care about elections when there is an environmental disaster. Although beaches are in the public domain, they're playing a political card, and then the PP playing the anti-nationalist card. The best thing to do would be get out of it and to spare us this pathetic spectacle, because you don't give a hoot for the cleanliness of beaches. We need to start local with beaches, with forests, with rivers. We need a conservative, patriotic policy which will protect our environment. We're not just talking about pollution on beaches, we're talking about survival of the fisheries sector. And the socialists and others for 40 years now have been systematically implementing foreign agendas. Processing, outsourced, fisheries restrictions, restricted economic areas extended, abusive EU overreach, turning Galicians into people who are dependent on others. 25% of European ports with more than 21% drop in catches, 20,000 jobs lost since 2004, 15% of processing businesses going under, ageing population and an ageing fishing fleet. Meanwhile, outside the EU, we see a 97% growth in 10 years, thanks to your friends in China and Morocco. That's the true disaster. You've created this flourishing sector, but outside the EU. And until we care about our EU fisheries, we won't be able to deal with this. Less pellets, more vessels.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Identity and Democracy, Mrs. Bigneux.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, last month, Europe witnessed a new maritime catastrophe. There were millions of plastic pellets that were thrown into the Atlantic Ocean near the Spanish coast. This is not a new phenomenon because every year there are 230 million tons of this sort of waste that ends up in the seas, and 2/3 of this pollution comes from Europe on its own. So the European Union does have a weighty responsibility to deal with these disasters, but this is basically down to their unbridled economic policies and the left wing who is exploiting this sort of situation just for electoral aims. So looking at what's going on between China and the US or what's going on in the Red Sea, once again we're paying a very high price of our dependence on the rest of the world. We need to act to reindustrialise Europe, not just for the European citizens and for their purchasing power, but also for the environment and for sovereignty. The same mistakes are provoking the same errors, so time on time. Let's stop this.
On behalf of the left group, Mrs. Villanueva Ruiz. Thank you very much, President. More than a month after the plastic pellets spill that has overwhelmed Galicia and other coasts, the regional government of the PP is denying this, the same that denied climate change and that said that even when the Prestige oil spill took place, it wasn't that serious. Not only did they say that the pellets aren't toxic, but that you can even eat them. That is the level of responsibility and lack of shame. So we need European legislation, ambitious legislation that will put an end to business impunity that are not assuming responsibility and liability, and this is stopping the authorities from acting immediately. Of course, we have to protect the environment and our fisheries sector. The spill on the 8th of December was a disaster, but what has happened since then is pure negligence. Never again. Thank you very much. We've come to the end of the list of speakers speaking on behalf of the political groups. Now, Mrs. Dancy.
President, Commissioner, colleagues, plastic pellets are one of the major sources of microplastic pollution. In the air, water and soil, they can spread through our bodies and animals' bodies. The Commission's ambitious aim of reducing plastic release by 70% is a breath of life for our marine and land ecosystems that are suffering from pollution. We need better practices, mandatory certification, harmonised methodology for prevention and inspection of microplastic pollution. Those are the kind of smart solutions which we need so that stakeholders in the sector can see that there are very clear rules and instruments that can be used purely in the interest of health. We only have one chance for health, and this kind of toxicity can easily lead to death. So we need to strive for the Europe we want to see.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Montserrat. Thank you very much, President. To you from the left, are you really so nervous that you're going to lose at the polls again? On the Spanish coast, it's not just the Galician coast, we're getting pellets from a container. They're washing up on the shores. We could be talking about the 350 people that are working on 55 beaches and helicopters and what the Galician regional government is doing. But you're not interested because what the left wants to do is to gain something from this crisis, something they couldn't get in other ways. Now, I would like to say that you gave in to Puigdemont, fugitive from justice, but yet you're slow to deal with this crisis that affects everyone. Galicia is acting. You act as well because you have powers here. To ask you to show responsibilities too much, but at least stop being opportunistic and stop lying. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Albuquerque.
toneladas.
26 tonnes of microplastic pellets across the coast of Galicia and Asturias. Tragic images of millions of pellets polluting our environment. I would like to express my support and gratitude to our Galician brothers and sisters who are spending day after day clearing up their beaches. I presented a report on prevention of microplastic pollution. The aim was to take the Commission proposal forward in relation to three key aspects. When pellets are lost in the environment, they're extremely difficult to recover. For that reason, all of our efforts should go into effective prevention measures to reduce or even eliminate losses of such pellets into the environment. This disaster has also made it clear that we need to extend legislation to cover maritime transport too. As the Commissioner was saying, we need to bring more pressure to bear in the International Maritime Organization to ensure that we have effective measures governing European territory. Deterrent measures. There are different operators along the value chain that need to be effectively involved in strengthening sanction measures. But I also want to be clear that no European citizen, no Galician citizen should see accountability for those responsible for protecting our ecosystems. Finally, a plea. Let us not say, OK, this happened on one beach, that's happened. Let then people take electoral advantage of this in political debates. We need to look at the solution for the people of Galicia. We don't want another traumatic event like the one of 21 years ago. Let us take the right path of history now.
Thank you very much. Mr. Torvalds.
Mr. Speaker, dearest Commissioner, I have with me 3 different reports here, and they are all telling the same sad story. Containers lost at sea is a huge problem. The catastrophe outside or off the coast of Portugal and Spain actually there was 6 containers. What we see in the reports, it goes for the US vessel El Faro, it goes for the Ever Smart, is that the containers are usually stuck in a criminal way. In the future, with more storms, you're going to have more problems, more catastrophes, if we don't get the vessels in order. The equipment is bad, the vessels are old, and they are stuck in a way which is not going according to the rules. So what you have on the top of a stack is a too heavy container, and when the ship starts rolling 20% to the left and to starboard and port, then you have it there. So we have to get the rules to work, and if we don't get them, the catastrophes will be there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Miranda.
Como eurodiputada galega, pedí este debate ante la catástrofe medioambiental del...
Following the environmental disaster affecting my country of Galicia, I launch a call for ACTA. It's not only a problem for Galicia, it's for the whole of Europe. We saw through December that the pellets were spreading, but it was a month later in January that the official communication took place. So the government of Galicia and the people of Galicia felt completely abandoned and left to their own devices. Maria Lago, I would like to thank, who's here, and the mayor of Ribeira, and all of those who've engaged in the clear-up activity. Thank you to those members from 5 groups for signing the letter, which we will send to you, Commissioner. Galicia is not alone, and the anti-pollution level 2 alert only came in late too. If you listen to people from the PP, you hear these slogans coming from Galicia about improvisation, negligence, lack of transparency. The PP government is calling them little plastic balls, but we're talking about thousands of bags of pellets that are spreading. Such levels of incompetence. Look at the unique biodiversity and marine ecosystem of Galicia, the huge impact on the marine environment. This has a knock-on effect on fishers and on people's way of life. The PP government has been harming this way of life for many years now, and it goes beyond that to the whole fisheries sector. So no distraction tactics, please. There'll be a demonstration in Santiago on Sunday with 5 different collectives, but the mismanagement is nothing new. We went there with the Prestige too. Nothing has been learnt since then. And a marketing company linked to the PP has been involved in the clear-up of pellets with a coat from the protective jacket from the Xunta saying, oh, well, wear this, that'll be better. It's all about PR. We're talking about dangerous materials with significant accidents, with consequences for the environment, and the new microplastics loss regulation needs to cover this. Galicia deserves better. It deserves a responsible government.
You have a blue card from Mr. Guzmão. Do you accept it? Yes. Yeah. 30 seconds for you.
Senhora Deputada Ana Miranda.
Ms. Miranda, solidarity with Galicia, solidarity with the people of Galicia in the light of these events. Picking up on what you said, given that the municipal chamber president is here, what support was there from the government of Galicia? The Portuguese media were saying that there had been prefect level and NGO level, fishers level activity without much support from the regional government. Is that true? Thank you for that question. The PP government in Galicia, as you said, took at least a month to get state assistance. We are still waiting in Galicia. There are 169 workers hired by the government of Galicia, over 1,500 kilometres. Don't interrupt me. They are rejecting the offers from the government of the state. So I'd like to thank those representatives and the 100 or more people. I don't have this in Spanish. I don't have this in writing. You had a response in writing.
Thank you very much.
Yo tengo los datos. Aquí los datos.
Mrs. Miranda, thank you very much. You have more than enough time to answer. Mr. Terch, you have the floor.
Buenos días a todos.
Good morning, everyone. Just to make it all clear, on the 18th of February, there are elections in Galicia. It's a beautiful region of Spain with beautiful coastline, but we've got plastic pellets washing up. But Tarragona and in Catalonia have also grappled with the same problem, but yet we didn't have such a debate. Don't worry. The title misses the point. There isn't an ecological disaster. It's the wrong title of the debate. There is a problem to solve, but it's just one more problem to solve. But the problem is that the Spanish government has basically carried out a coup d'etat. So they like anything that allows them to talk about other issues, anything but the amnesty. And they were told that there is a coup and that they are destroying the Spanish judiciary. So they'd rather look for little plastic balls or pellets because it's easier to do that, pellets that are apparently a disaster. So, and then there's the Galician government, too. I think they should all look at protecting the Galician coast more and fighting against Agenda 2030, which is responsible for what is happening there. The next speaker is Mrs. Marisa Matias.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, we don't often see such a clear demonstration of complete indifference to people and people's suffering, as we've just heard. I'd like to start by thanking Ms. Miranda for putting her finger on the nub of this crucial issue. It's an environmental disaster once again for the people of Galicia. 26 tons of plastic pellets ending up in the sea. Just like with the Prestige 20 years ago, it was incompetence from the PP Galician authorities. Totally unacceptable. Our marine ecosystems being polluted by plastic pellets is something which cannot be faced with impunity in Galicia or anywhere else in the world. We see a growing problem, and in spring we'll be talking not only about Galicia but Portugal and France, their coastlines too. So we need ambitious proposals to avoid microplastic pollution, to prevent it, so that this phenomenon can cease to exist. So we see environmental disaster denialism here played out in real time by some Spanish representatives.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sinčić.
Hvala vam. Thank you very much. Plastic pellets and their influence on the environment is significant, and any ecological disaster is a loss for life on Earth. But most of the waste in the sea comes from land, not the sea. So waste management is crucial in every country in the EU with recycling and waste management. Maybe it is better for some countries to join their efforts together for waste management efforts. Let us not deceive ourselves. There is very little level of waste management in Europe. Most waste is not now exported to China but to Taiwan and other countries. In the city of Zagreb, we had a disaster at the waste management site, also in Osijek and in Varaždin. So all the centers for waste management are a disaster for the cities and the local governments. And the local government in Zagreb is not able to handle this situation. And also we have seen who is in charge of the Environment Protection Fund, and this is a criminal activity. Croats need to find political courage to stop this and stop the environment.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Pereira is next.
Acidente que não podia ter.
An accident that should never happen happened. Over 1,000 bags of microplastic pellets now along the coast of the north of Spain, Galicia, since the beginning of the year. The government of Portugal, the regional government of Galicia, the national government of Spain could not have avoided this because of the nature of the accident. But when people have powers, when people have responsibilities, it is incumbent upon them to respond properly. We saw prompt and timely communication from the government of Portugal, but Pedro Sanchez was playing politics with this, and we saw the hypocrisy of the PSOE, the Spanish Socialist Party, passing the buck, incompetence and misleading distortions, trying to point the finger of blame at the regional government of Galicia, whereas in fact it was the regional government of Galicia that was the only party really concerned about minimising the consequences of the incident. Sanchez and his government, if they had a scrap of political dignity, should be asking for forgiveness, particularly from the people of Galicia, because of the awful environmental impact of their policies. I also think it's a bit odd that when we ask for a debate on the rule of law in Spain, we're accused of being too national in our focus, and now suddenly we're accused of being too regional. Well, chapeau to the left.
The next speaker is Mr. Balt.
Panie Przewodniczący,
President, Commissioner, colleagues, 160 tons of plastic pellets and 12 million tons of plastic of various types are spilled into our seas and oceans every year. It is very well known that plastic waste has negative influence for fish and humans who are at risk of consuming it directly or indirectly. The ecological disaster that started off with Portugal but then reached Spanish Galicia can also reach other European coasts. This situation shows us that we definitely need to boost controls of transporting toxic waste around Europe. We also and toxic products around Europe. We have to boost monitoring, and we have to be able to quickly react. In line with the principle polluter pays, companies and businesses need to bear more responsibility for any lost containers. It must be more profitable to actually guarantee the security than pay the insurance policy. We also need tools that will help local communities to fight for clean environment. It's the guarantee of our health and health of animals. We cannot let oceans to become a free waste dump. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mrs. Bilbao Barandica. The plastic pellet spill that affects the western coast of the Iberian Peninsula, and especially Galicia, could lead us to a discussion on the local reaction given this accident. But I think there are those who are spending more time on who saw this first and who reported it, instead of focusing on how to apply the lessons we learned after the Prestige spill. This is what we're trying in the Basque Country with a public-private partnership called Itxas Ertza, bringing together the fishing fleet, authorities and scientific institutes. The debate is local and it could spill over into the one here, which of course has to take place. We have to focus on prevention and avoiding new spills and discharges. We have to make sure that the IMO says this material is hazardous. We have to look at transport and monitoring, and the industry, the plastics industry, has to apply technology and innovation to look for alternatives. And we face another challenge. We already decided on the phase-out of single-use plastics. Let us set deadlines so that in the future we transport plastic pellets in a format that, if there is a spill, it can be easy to collect. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Guerrero.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, colleagues. This tragedy, which unfortunately occurred in Galicia and is affecting the coast of Portugal too, does show us one positive point about the EU. Now, you see all kinds of accusations flying back and forth from the far right and so on, but here we see that the EU institutions have actually done a good job. We have legislation in the Parliament, but also internationally, to ensure that the entire production and distribution chain of these goods, which should be considered hazardous materials, is efficient and allowing for a response to such emergencies. The European Maritime Safety Agency, which set up in the aftermath of the Prestige disaster, has now shown us how the EU can respond together. There are a few YouTube clips and TikToks and so on, which explain this a lot forward. I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Mato.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. We're worried about the plastic pellet spill lost in Portugal and that is affecting Cantabria, the Basque Country, and Galicia. Of course we're worried, but the nationalist left is only interested in the regional elections in Galicia on the 18th of February. That is why the debate is taking place. They're worried about the fact that there are problems, but the left is only worried or rather interested in making sure that everyone sees the regional government in Galicia in a bad light. And yet we're worried about other things that you are not. The nationalists and the left are only interested in the 18th of February. We're interested in finding solutions for all the beaches affected and making sure that this never happens again. But the left and the nationalists don't care about the fact that their campaign against the junta will affect the fishers in Galicia. It's all about the 18th of February. Unfortunately, there is a deadline to your terrible campaign, and that is the 18th of February. But until then, we will continue along the same track. Despite the socialists and despite the nationalists, we will work for the welfare of the Galicians and all Spaniards, every single Spaniard. Thank you. Mr. Carlos Kind.
You have the floor.
Oui, un point d'ordre.
Yes, a point of order. We needed interpretation from French when Mr. Mato spoke, but we didn't get that, so we didn't, unfortunately, hear what Mr. Mato had to say.
I didn't get Greek interpretation either. Mr. Chahim.
Chair, I will stay on topic. Het lijkt onzichtbaar, maar...
It seems invisible, but it's actually a disaster. It's a disaster that only becomes visible once you take a sieve through the sand, because there are so many small pellets there. It might not seem dangerous, but as microplastic pollution, these pellets are a threat to nature, the environment, but also the fishing industry as well. It's no good having good intentions. To avoid these sort of accidents, everybody concerned, all the stakeholders, have to make sure that these pellets aren't lost, because we need to stop this sort of local disaster, and to do that, the local authorities need to be prepared, and it doesn't seem to be the case here. We also need to wonder why there's so much waste coming. Why do we need all this plastic? We have to deal with our plastic addiction. And the way that plastic is used for bottles and bags, we need to stop those, and we're going in the right direction on that front. But we need to make sure that microplastic pollution doesn't remain invisible in our ecosystems and our environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Rodriguez Ramos.
Thank you, President. 6 containers from the ship Tocanel, 1,050 bags with 25 kilos of pellets in each. An environmental tragedy, but alas, not an isolated case. Between 52,000 and 180,000 pellets are lost in the environment in the EU annually. For that reason, Commissioner, it is absolutely necessary for the pellets regulation to include maritime transport of pellets. It has to be in the scope. We need a European law that will lay down specific obligations for economic operators and those in the transport sector to avoid loss of pellets. But also, Commissioner, we need a law with a clear protocol as to how the 27 EU member states should behave to avoid the kind of events which, unfortunately, we've seen in Spain recently. Since the 8th of December, we don't know what the Spanish government has actually done to stop pellets washing up on the shore, with regional governments asking questions about whether these are toxic or not. For God's sake, plastic in the ocean, it's not good news. So let's end these political battles. The Galician elections will one day be over, but the plastic will still be there on the coast.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mrs. O'Sullivan.
This, my friends, is an oil spill by another name. The spilling of millions of plastic pellets into the Sea of Galicia is a crime. It should be considered as serious as the oil tanker Prestige spill off the coast of Galicia in 2002, or the many other hundreds of environmental disasters we have become familiar with in this plastic age. Unlike the transport of materials like crude oil, which is classified as a hazard to transport, there is still no such regulation for the transport of crude plastics. This must change. The petrochemical plastic industries cannot be defended. We should act like the people of Skibbereen in my constituency in Ireland South, who, when a large multinational tried to build a plastic pellet factory in their beautiful scenic town, they said loud and clear, "We will not support the plague of plastic." And I agree.
Thank you very much. Mr. Milan Mon is the next speaker. Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, as I feared, there's been a lot of exaggeration and lies. I don't think that this debate would be taking place if we didn't have elections around the corner, and this is proof. There's been a dual injustice in Galicia. The government has been aware of the accident. They were aware on the 8th of December, but they only informed the regional government on the 3rd of January. They didn't carry out their duties and they didn't activate the plans necessary. Commissioner Sinkevičius, the Galician regional government is not going to rest until all beaches are clean. It is rolling out and deploying resources by air and at sea, way beyond its powers. There has been a lot of disinformation, lie spill, if you like, a tide of lies from various people saying that photos from Sri Lanka and Texas were actually showing the situation in Galicia, but they weren't. So let us use common sense, let us be reasonable, stop these electoral maneuvers. It's going to tarnish the image of Galicia and the industry. We're not going to allow this. Thank you. The next speaker is Mrs. Schaldemose.
Right now, we're witnesses to an environmental catastrophe on our coasts. The plastic pellets from ships, they contaminate our seas, they wash onto our beaches, and they're being eaten by birds and fishes alike because they look like plankton. They then come into the animals. They won't decompose, and when small fish are eaten by bigger ones, well, the plastic goes along, so our nature suffers. We have to do everything we can to clean this up. We need plastic out of our oceans. That's our task right now. But in the long term, we also need to make sure that an environmental catastrophe like this cannot happen. We need political solutions. In December, 6 containers fell off a ship at the Spanish coast. So we need to be the first here in Europe to suggest that we need better rules. We have better rules. We have to stop this.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Aguilera.
Muchas gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. I'd like to take this first opportunity to express my gratitude to civil society, especially in Galicia. What extraordinary efforts have gone into the clear-up and elimination of waste on the coastline of Galicia. We're seeing civil society in Galicia showing that it is definitely up to the task, which I'm not sure that we have shown ourselves to be in this debate. The fishery sector is a professional one. Let them get on with their jobs. Commissioner, I think you were quite right to say that this new environmental disaster should allow us to put in place effective prevention measures in the EU to avoid future spills and the damage caused by microplastics. Let us learn the lesson from this terrible situation, but we need action. The government of Galicia is showing itself to be highly negligent. We need to avoid the environmental impact. We can do the finger-pointing later. We need to act now. The PP in Spain, the EPP in Europe, and the far right, who seem to have already left, should suddenly be so concerned about this, because there are elections coming up. If all the waste that was generated in Spain is mounting up, it would overshadow this sort of pathetic attempt to point the finger at Pedro Sanchez now. It just has no credibility.
So we have come to the end of the list of speakers, and we can move on to the Catch the Eye procedure. I have 7 requests. Given the seriousness of the debate and how important this is, I will accept all 7 requests. Mr. Herbst has 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a very important issue for all of us in Europe, and it truly is just the tip of the iceberg. So let's just put the election campaigning aside. And my question would be, also to the Commissioner, how did the Spanish government inform you? And how were France, for example, as a neighboring country, informed by the Spanish government? This is a crucial European question. And I recognize that not many colleagues here talked about, for example, the legislative package on maritime security. And I also remember that somebody who spoke 1 month ago here in Parliament, Mr. Sanchez, did not talk about this issue at all. I mean, frankly speaking, did not talk about European issues at all. So my question would be, how did the Spanish government inform the European government?
Σας ευχαριστώ. Επόμενος ομιλητής.
The next speaker is Mrs. Carvalhais.
Caros colegas,
Dear colleagues, millions of pellets on the beaches of Galicia. That is an environmental disaster. The regional authorities can say they're not toxic, but we're talking about non-biodegradable materials on a huge scale that will remain in marine ecosystems for an indefinite period, with a long-lasting effect on those ecosystems and on the fisheries and seafood sectors and those who depend on coastal tourism too. So we need rapid action to minimise the environmental impact and the economic impact too as we go into summer, and we need an EU response showing that we have the necessary measures in place to prevent a replay of this ever. We need to avoid vessels using flags of convenience in order to circumvent security and environmental rules which we have in the EU, because they're much laxer elsewhere. So we do need concrete action, Commissioner.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Solé.
Gracias, President.
Thank you very much, President. I'd like to offer my support to the Galician people. Once again, they're grappling with an ecological disaster affecting their seas and beaches, but they're also dealing with the incompetence of the Galician regional government that reacted too late and badly. Unfortunately, where I come from in Catalonia, we've also grappled with plastic pellet pollution. This is particularly serious, and it affects Pineda near Tarragona and the petrochemical industry there. After having dealt with all those in the value chain and putting forward good practices, and thanks to civil society as well, the Catalan government has taken 8 chemical companies to court, and the public prosecutor has stepped in as well. We have to be able to find what lies behind this, the root causes, and to ensure that there's accountability. We welcome European legislation, Commissioner Sinkevicius, but there should be more tools available to avoid these spills and therefore pollution. There cannot be impunity if there are such disasters. Thank you very much. Mr. Kokalis is next. Thank you very much, President.
Debated about the decision of Norway to drill the deep sea in the Arctic, and we asked for a moratorium. If that doesn't happen and they drill, do you know what they will find? They will find plastic. There's so much plastic. SCA calculated there is 100 billion tons every year. There is a great plastic garbage patch, plastic island in the Pacific Ocean, which is 3 times the size of France. And there are 5 of these islands. And we produce more and more plastic. So, dear Commissioner Sinkevicius, when this mandate began, we talked about a blue deal. And you've done a great job. You pushed forward the ocean agreement in the biodiversity COP15 in Montreal, Kunming. You reached an agreement on the beyond jurisdiction high seas regulation. I think it's time to be serious about our zero pollution commitment on the Green Deal, talk about the next mandate, and realize that we must stop the plastic addiction. Plastics are fossil fuels, and the people of Galicia are suffering from another oil spill, like Grace said, 20 years later. We must deal with that and realize that transitioning away from fossil fuels, as we discussed in COP28, includes getting away from plastics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tarabella.
Micro, please.
Chaque année, des millions de tonnes de plastique.
There are thousands of tons of plastic pollution that are being tipped into the sea, which are threatening the environment. According to data, 100,000 mammals in the sea are suffering as a result and are killed. So soon there's going to be more plastic than fish in the sea. But it's also a question of public health, because we're looking at these microplastic pellet pollution, and for our children and their children, they're being threatened. The proposal from the Commission to deal with plastic pellet pollution is a good starting point, but the European Parliament, I think, needs to be more ambitious. It's more than high time to fight this ecological and health disaster. And unfortunately, this is something that seems to be happening again and again.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Cerdas.
Obrigada, Presidente.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, colleagues. We saw a tragic accident with the Prestige 20 years ago. Now we see another environmental tragedy on the same territory with very serious consequences, not only for local communities. It is not a regional problem. This is a European issue. And as Shadow Rapporteur for the new rules, I would say we need much harsher sanctions in order to ensure we have stricter observance of the rules. The competent authorities should have an environmental impact assessment of such disasters and implement preventive measures in order to avoid future environmental disasters. Allow me to conclude by expressing my solidarity with Galicia and my sisters and brothers in Galicia and all those who are working hard to mitigate the consequences of the disaster.
Thank you very much. Mr. Galles, the last speaker under Catch the Eye.
Thank you, President. Ladies and gentlemen, 26 tons of plastic pellets. When they fall into the sea, it's tragic, it's an accident, but above all, it shows a lack of responsibility for the companies who are meant to assume responsibility. For the shipping companies who are shipping these pellets, that there is a possibility of them falling in the sea, they have to cover that. And this is the huge problem. Environmental pollution still is too cheap. There's an economic calculation by firms involved that they are willing to run that risk. We need to stop that, and that's why it's so incredibly important that we have rules on plastic pellets that are put in place and ensure genuinely that on an international level, the oceans and the work done in these regions be taken into consideration. Obviously, there's no point if we just make sure that plastic pellets within the internal waterways of the EU aren't lost. We need international standards. We are responsible to the environmental movement and to all of these people who are now spending their time to sift through the sand to get the pellets out again.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the Catch the Eye procedure. Now, Mr. Sinkevičius, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, honourable members. First of all, what's very clear that today's debate shows the importance of tackling pollution by plastic pellets, as well as the complexity of this issue. There are no easy solutions, but we do need bold and decisive action to protect our oceans and to deliver on the zero pollution target. We are committed to reducing plastic litter at sea by 50% and microplastic released into the environment by 30% by 2030. Some may be inclined to look at these targets as sort of nice figures, but when pollution strikes for real, like on the Spanish coast, we see that environmental concerns climb to the top of the political agenda. So the success will depend on our joint, coordinated efforts to support decisive and rapid actions and decisions at all relevant levels. Regarding maritime transport, dear colleagues, I heard your requests and we are ready to consider its inclusion in EU law. For instance, to forbid the carriage of pellets in bulk and work together on ensuring good quality packaging and safe stowage on board ships. We are also calling on all parties involved to act at international levels. We urge all member states to unite their efforts at the International Maritime Organization for a swift conclusion of the deliberations on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The debate is closed. So we can move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Mato report, Implementation of the Common Fisheries Policy and Future Perspectives. Mr. Mato, the rapporteur, has the floor.